I've got quite a varied kind of influence of the extremities of body mechanics. Everything from really specific trained stuff that we do in corrective exercise, where we're trying to build stuff very carefully and integrate things properly, to the railway, where you basically do whatever you can do for 12 hours without dying kind of thing. And then we've got the boxing, which is very explosive, very energy dense. So before we get into talking about, looking at the slide, there's nothing there. Before we get into cognitive efficiency, the first thing I want to do is kind of outline what I'm not going to talk about. And then maybe why I talk about cognitive efficiency, and then lead that into some stuff you can take away, hopefully in your own classes and your own practice. So first up, physical efficiency. Something that comes up quite often. We say, what's the economy of movement? How are we saving energy? How do we do this without burning too much energy? And though I see this argument, it's an area where there's a lot of context, in that if I'm doing something extremely inefficient, but I'm very strong, it doesn't really matter for the end goal a lot of the time. Likewise, if I'm fighting for 5 minutes or a minute or even less than that for an MMA context, for example, I don't necessarily need the efficiency of a boxer that is fighting for 12 rounds. So, there's something there that you can talk about, but it's not really what we're looking at today. The other thing is techniques. So a lot of the time when we talk about martial arts, we get into the nitty-gritty of, how do I do this technique ultimately efficiently? How do I use leverage? How do I make sure I'm going through the shortest path between 2 points? All this kind of stuff. And again, it's an area you can talk about. You can kind of pontificate on what makes the most sense, or is strength really that important? But ultimately, if you've ever been hit by a wild hook and been knocked out by like a really silly attack, you realize that it's important, but for me at least, in my own training, I found that you can kind of skip it in a lot of contexts if you're a brute, essentially. And the last thing that I'm not going to talk about that's very, very similar, very close, is fluency. So we often say, you just practice this for many years. If you keep doing it, if you get into a flow, you eventually get efficient. And totally true in terms of just pure mechanical efficiency. But a lot of people tend to forget that you do get bad habits in there as well, or you get things that are being assumed and not really being taken apart. So one of the things that a corrective exercise specialist will do is you look at a motion and you try and break it down into minimal parts and find out what's breaking, what's working, and try and put it back together. And fluency, or practice as you often use in just general martial arts, it hides a ton of stuff. And you start to think, oh yeah, if I just do this, things will eventually come together. And then you go to a specialist because you've got bad shoulder, bad knee, bad hip, and it's like something you've been doing for years badly. So so what we're going to get into is, I keep looking at this, thinking there's stuff here. There's nothing here, I've got to go through my phone. So what we are going to talk about is cognitive efficiency. And this is essentially the idea of removing mental and physical barriers to doing things that make things a little bit more difficult. So I come from, the art I'm doing right now, is Shastar Vidiya. It's a battlefield martial art. And getting into this style of fighting has really made me concentrate on this in my own teaching, in that when you realize that you may be fighting multiples, you may be fighting people that have got tactics specifically designed to take you down, that don't really care about what your skill level is. They'll throw things at you, they'll run around you, they'll trip you up, and they'll do things that require minimal effort and minimal mastery. Yeah, they give you a lot of stuff to think about. And why this lens specifically? Why does this lens matter in martial arts, and especially weapons combat? Well, for me, it's been a lot about seeing people progress and trying to figure out, how do you make people progress with so many different variables you're trying to control, and just saying practice and letting that do so much work, going, just practice this and you'll get better, practice that and you'll get better. Whereas when I've actually taken the things apart, as I've been trained to do essentially, and gone, what are the actual things that are making the biggest difference in this? And I've almost invariably landed on, if you're teaching something and it doesn't make the person feel like things are easier, if they're not going, wow, this feels so much easier mentally, I feel like physically more relaxed doing this, then you're probably asking too much already, if that makes any sense. Yeah? Yeah. Cool. So, historic variables. So we've got multiples. Obviously, you've got multiple different types of weapons. You've got different types of armor, which change how you move. You've got different types of collisions. So if you're used to just fighting for scoring points, or even just hitting things hard, That's very different to fighting where one guy is going to charge you off your feet and another guy is going to try and trip you up and another guy is going to like shove you back as opposed to trying to hit you. You've got terrain. So a massive thing we talk about is fighting uphill, fighting on mud, fighting on anything where explosive movements that you might learn in boxing will become really inefficient and really scary, really like dangerous. Then you've got lighting issues. So fighting in the dark, fighting against the sun, fighting even when you're just groggy. All of these different things are adding up to a system where you've got pressures that say, if you're relying too heavily on your skills and your practice, so to speak, and you're not doing things that are actually easy to pull off under pressure, then things start to fall apart quite quickly, if that makes sense. Yeah. So we'll start with multiples. And I'll start with a story. Am I going at a good pace, by the way? By the way, I don't do this very often, so if this is like odd, cool. Okay, cool.
You're great.
I'm not like rushing through it. Okay, so multiples. So when I first came to Shastar Vidiya, I'd come from fresh out of, I think, Wing Chun, but I was doing a lot of sparring. So I'd go to, Muay Thai gyms, kickboxing gyms, BJJ. So I was pretty rough and tumble. Like, I loved like just hitting people. And then I went to this seminar and he was like, so who here thinks strategy matters? Who thinks skill matters? And, it was a bit even. People were like, skill really matters. Some people say, no, strategy's everything. So he said, okay, let's test this. Who here has more than 10 years experience in fighting? And I put my hand up, he calls me out, and he says, how many beginners do you think it would take to take this guy down? And people are like 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. So he brings out 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. We eventually get up to like 6 or 7, and they're absolute beginners, and they're really just kind of, this kind of stuff when I'm like throwing at them and moving around. And then he goes, okay, so he's like, he's pretty handy. Then he takes 2 of them away and says, all right, I can beat this guy, just give me a second. Has a little conversation with them. 2 of them come back. They walk at me shoulder to shoulder. And when they get pretty close, they just do this and run at me. One of them, like each of them tries to grab an arm. They both stand on my legs and then they just fall on me to the ground. And he was like, so that was 10 years worth of training versus like fighting really experienced people defeated with like minimal strategy. So in this kind of combat, they immediately go, okay, striking, bottom, skill, bottom. Strategies, tactics, that has to be at the top, if that makes sense. And what it really comes down to in these multiple situations is you think about what are the failures, what are the likely failures. So that scenario, someone's going to charge me and it doesn't matter how skillful I am, I can only take on one of them. At the time, this is what he kind of explained to us, that when there are multiple people coming at you, there are windows of opportunity and you can't just skill your way out of it. You have to be like, look, if this guy charges me at this point and I have no plan, and my only plan is I'm gonna move quick, someone else will take me down from a different side. So that's like your failure sort of points. Then we think about it as forced failure. So rather than trying to avoid things failing and trying to get around them, you just say, okay, this is going to fail at some point. How do we manage that and how do we make that advantageous for us? And I did have an image up showing one thing you kind of take away. I'll try and describe it though.
We'll add it in post. It'll be on YouTube.
Okay, cool. So one of the ways we do this is we talk about pinning. And it's kind of a combination of like a juke or like a fake out from basketball. But what we're essentially doing is trying to define a space and then say, here are all the places where this person can hit me. So for example, if I run at an opponent and I fake one way and then move this way, or I run at an opponent and I start drifting this way, I've immediately said, here's 2 vectors. You can either deal with me here or you can deal with me here, but you have to deal with me in one of them. And these are the extremes of my movements. These are the extreme places I can fail. And much easier from the diagram, but if I can catch you in between trying to set up for either of those, same thing that happens in basketball and rugby, where I go one way, you commit to this one and I go the other way. If I can catch you in between that and put something in a place where just geometrically you can't get around it, whether it be a shield, a spear, if I put it in this area, it's going to slow you down and it's going to speed me up mentally, because suddenly I've gone, okay, I haven't run up to my opponent and looked at what they're doing and tried to figure out how to deal with their attack. I've said, I know they're going to attack me. I know they're going to attack me at a certain time. Then I'm going to say, you have to attack me here or here, but whichever one you go for, I'm going to make it a gamble on your part, essentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how we took this away and put it into our own combat. We've done a bunch of different exercises designed to get this feeling, which is far more about just controlling space based on time. and understanding failure, essentially, and just saying, look, I know I'm going to fail, just make it fail in my favor. And that way you get a bit of a, I guess a bit of a framework or tools that allow you to take things apart and make them easier to pull off, if that makes sense. Any questions on that, by the way? Because I know that there was a picture, so it may not have made sense. Making sense? All good? Cool, so we'll move on. The next thing that's a massive part of the training is loading considerations. So historically, Shastar Vidiya is a royal art, a classical art. It's something you'd be taught from a kid all the way through your childhood. And then it's essentially the same as certain schools of yoga and stuff, or even building, where it becomes like an ology, where it's not so much just a hobby or even a specific style of fighting. It's the official study of fighting, from everything from spears and swords and knives to horsebacks to archery, all that kind of stuff. And one of the big things that we always talk about is how you actually load your body or your structure, and how that needs to be consistent across everything. So if I'm loading and doing things in a way that works really well on horseback, then I go to unarmed and I start doing something entirely different. So I'm thinking, oh, if I want to generate power, I twist or something. Suddenly I put my armor on, I twist, I'm on a horse, my horse bolts the wrong way, my back feels strained, I can't do things properly. So loading has to be consistent and has to be considered right from the beginning, especially when you're picking up different weapons, because in the battlefield, you're expected to like change positions and be comfortable with a spear, with a sword, with a mace, with everything. And we'll get into that. So we're gonna break it down. Hold on, let me go back if I can. That's fine. So firstly, we'll talk about weapons. So loading with weapons. It's one thing to hit something, and you can pretty much, my teacher doesn't really put much emphasis on striking in general, because he's like, with a blade, especially with a sword or a knife, for guys back in this time when everyone cut cane, everyone was pretty handy, like cutting up animals and stuff, they just don't consider it a massive, I guess, thing to be able to cut through something. But they do consider a difference between cutting something and being able to withstand pressure. So if you can cut, but you can't have someone run at you, hit, hold the hit, and then finish the hit, or even cut through thick bits of leather where it's not one clean cut, it might be here, it gets a bit stuck, but you can finish it. That kind of mindset is a massive thing. And if your baseline understanding of loading is, I'm gonna explode into movements, like I would in boxing, it's all about pushing and trying to use muscles as hard as I can, not only do you burn out very quickly, but you also leave very little headroom to do that kind of thing. If I give all of my power in that initial motion and I make contact, and that armor, whatever it is, dissipates all of that force, I've got nothing left in the tank. So really what we do is somewhere between a sort of American football handoff. Do people know what that is? Yeah. Like, so you run in and you can basically make a structure, push someone out of the way, where it's not run and then go, like try and deck them. Though people might do that. It's more, do I have a structure where I don't have to do too much muscularly to take their force? And then how do I put force through that? So you've even got things like thrusting, for example. Though it's something that we tend to avoid with swords, because swords is a skirmishing style in Indian martial arts. They say if you're fighting in formation, ideally you want a spear, axe, shield, all of that. Sword doesn't really give you that much advantage in a formation, but running around it does. But even with spears, again, stabbing someone with a spear and having something like a polearm with I forget what you call it, but like a stop on it so people can't run down the spear. They have it in like boar spears and stuff. Having someone run at something and then being able to hold it, again, it's a massive consideration. You'd think, oh yeah, just tighten up, but it's not quite that simple. It's, you want to learn how to distribute your load through your body in a sort of balanced way. I'll try and get into that in a sec. And a great way of thinking about this is comparing things like boxing to a javelin throw or American football or something like that. So for example, if I'm boxing, my main thing is rotation, pushing off the ground, and trying to do what we call kinetic linking, or kinematic linking sometimes they call it, where the force goes into the ground first, into my leg, through my hips, I turn, and you get a bit of a momentum transfer into a punch. In battlefield combat, that's multiple actions. I've got to rely on the ground. I've got to turn in such a way that I'm going to have to turn back in a minute. I'm punching in a way where it's very disconnected from the rest of my body. It's not a handoff. It's not me lining something up, then charging into it and hitting. It's me trying to isolate my power into one specific movement, which if I fuck up and I miss, and then someone hits me immediately afterwards, I have no structure, if that makes sense. So we have what we call the trebuchet technique. So if you think about throwing a javelin, like a lot of these guys aren't hugely muscular. They're fit, but their power comes from momentum transfer. It's they take a run up, they stop, and at the moment they stop, that energy that they built up has to go somewhere. It goes into the javelin. We take the same principle and apply it to downwards movement. So if I'm moving forwards and I want to create a lot of power, I don't push, I don't twist, I learn to sink suddenly. And as I change direction and I get sensitive to it, there's a massive momentum transfer. And we call this the trebuchet because the thing about trebuchets is they move very slowly, very controlled, but at the end you can get a massive amount of force from a fairly low effort movement in comparison to something that uses tension and fibers and tries to build them up and release them, which is, I guess, an equivalent of boxing, where it's like tension, like tightness, snap, that kind of thing. We're more slow, lazy movement that ends up being quite heavy because it's lazy. Does that make sense? Any questions on this?
So just to keep track, you're differentiating between like 3 different kinds of movement here. There's like high tension boxing, there's like the football stiff arm,
Yes.
And then there's the trebuchet.
Trebuchet, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry. Just making sure.
Yeah. That was a good little breakdown. So yeah, that's the kind of extremes. Go for it.
The trebuchet reminded me of, I think it was, I forget exactly where I learned it from, but when I was in the crowd, it was helpful for like transfer when you can't move your feet.
Yes.
You drop down your weight and do a circular punch, especially when it gets to the wall, so you can put all that weight and transfer into a punch.
Yeah, it's pretty much that. Also, another thing about me, just as a side note, on the railway you swing a lot of hammers, and you do it for like very, very long hours. Like you might do a mile of unkeying or a mile of like knocking keys through or spikes through a sleeper, that kind of stuff. And you realize that it's pretty much the same mechanic, and like you won't really see guys on the railway doing this big twisting and explosive movements. You wouldn't like grab a hammer and try and smash it into the thing. You tend to get very good at relaxing to lift it up, relaxing to drop it, relaxing to lift it up, relaxing to drop it. And most guys that have been doing it for years, they'll get sledgehammers and do it with one hand, because you very quickly realize that it's very little to do with your body strength. It's more to do with, can I get all of this stuff moving at the same time? And if I can sync it at the same time, I get a lot of transfer. If I drop it at the same time, I get a lot of transfer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the blacksmithing, it's
Oh, yeah,
not
you're a
like all
blacksmith, yes,
power,
you know.
But it's just like you drop it, and at the last moment you actually let go of the handle, so it doesn't
Exactly.
transfer to
Exactly.
your elbow.
I mean, this whole thing really could be its own talk. Like, body mechanics is my thing. So if you want to talk about this in detail, or you got really good questions, hit me up. I'll like ramble on it about it for hours. But yeah, I guess the main things were understanding that there is explosive movement that has its efficiency, but it has a lot of different various factors that you have to take into account. You have momentum transfer based on stopping, which again has factors to take into account, and there's a run up and stop. And then there's the idea of sinking, which is mentally very easy. Once you get a handle on it, I think you've ever heard of the Dempsey step. Does anyone know about this?
The what?
Dempsey step? Dempsey step. It's a thing in boxing where you learn to sort of, like a wrestler drops and does this, but then you just kind of add a punch on the end, where it's far less about explosive push, it's more about learning to drop. This is an equivalent thing, except rather than sort of dropping down and moving, it's a slight sink and then we continue moving, rather than stopping and starting. How do we take this away and put this into our class? So this can be applied in pretty much anything, any weapon, but one way that we kind of break it down is we'll say, think about how much the initiation time is costing you and how much the correction time is costing you. If you've got this movement that works in practice because you're doing it slowly, but it is 3 actions, it is 1, 2, 3, and you're physically doing 3 things, but you're doing it against someone that's only doing 1 thing, just statistically this guy's going to beat you because it's easier for him. And any move that you look at, try and look at whether you can take that away and say, you know what, some of this stuff isn't actually that necessary. I can make this technique work without it. And once I've got it working, I can add things back to it and, think about it a bit more strategically. Second thing is having a primary structure as opposed to many. So for example, with cutting, we don't really learn different cuts. We learn how to make the arm strong at different positions. So we might have someone lean on you at this position, lean on you at this position, lean on you at this position, knowing that you can take force and then use that to do most of the cut and only the flick or whatever it is at the end to try and get your sword back, which is, again, a bit of a gear change, but it's totally doable. And you realize that you'll start closing distance as opposed to hitting and then coming back. It starts becoming, I close an area, I press, I close an area, I press, I close an area, I press. Because battlefield mechanics, right? And finally, if you're doing something in terms of power generation, and this is kind of across all sports, that corrupts your structure. So it might be boxing, it might be I'm punching, but every time I do something, I'm just over leaning. I can't even see it. If I'm doing this, but then I'm doing that, correcting from here is quite difficult. So it's like whatever you can find that is corrupting structure, find it early, get rid of it, try and stay in an area that feels good. Or even just grab something heavy, do a box squat, lift it, move it around and go, this is where I feel good, I want to stay here, that kind of thing. Any questions on that? No, I'm going to fly through this. This is unfortunate. I don't have enough slides.
Just have us reenact them.
Not about time, it's about quality.
True. So the next thing we have is movement considerations. So moving in armor is obviously its own thing, and underfoot conditions is its own thing. So I've worked on the railway, so walking on ballast that's unconsolidated and slippery and stuff, you tend to find a lot of people do penguin walks. You'll see people kind of walk like this, because anything like this is considered dangerous as fuck. Exactly the same principle in Shastar Vidiya. They call this a dead step. Anytime your weight is not directly over your feet, in some way or form, it can be like this, it could be like this, but it should never be like this, because this is a high slipping hazard, yeah? But then there's also, how do you actually generate speed if you're not pushing off the ground? We've kind of covered it slightly, so I've done these two together so I could flow them into one another. It's the trebuchet thing. But firstly, we're just going to talk about propulsion versus dynamic equilibriums. So if you think of a rocket, very efficient for getting to space, but very inefficient maybe per meter. It uses a lot of energy, very similar to boxing. Very efficient if I just need to hit you hard and I'm explosive and I've practiced this, but if I've got to do constant corrections and I've got to do it over a long time, no footballer is running like that, no rugby player is running like that. You're trying to lean into things. And these are where the diagrams would really help. So on the propulsion side, you've got challenges. You've got fighting inertia, which is the more armor you add on, the more weapons you're trying to hold, the more this method of movement is going to become costly. So not a massive issue if you're throwing, a javelin, or if you're just running around barefoot, naked on the beach, but a massive issue if you've got armor. High risk of slipping, we've already spoken about that, and recruitment complexity. So you might not think about it, but when your feet are touching the ground, you're trying to make a bunch of predictions about what's going to happen when you push into it, even if you're not aware of it. Especially on slippery ground, it tends to give you hesitation in your movement. In fact, if you haven't done it before, I highly recommend shampooing the floor or just getting a slippery surface, getting some really fluffy socks and trying to do your footwork. And you'll realize how quickly you are really fucking with your hips. You're putting yourself in some precarious situations. Whereas the dynamic equilibrium, it has its own problems in that often starting it is an issue, but once you're in motion, corrections are very subtle. Everything becomes like a control surface. Any slight change in weight distribution, any slight change in any forces essentially, you can create quite a massive movement with very little effort. And this is our primary form of movement. We don't sort of sprint into battle. We have this idea that you allow yourself to fall, and as you relax and your body wants to go back, in fact, let me do that again, it would make more sense. I always do this. But if I stretch my back and I relax it, it kind of makes me want to tilt back. But if I allow myself to fall, then relax in the same manner, I reach a point where my body will continue moving and I'm not really doing much to add to this. Then to throw someone off, I don't think push. I use my weapons almost as control surface. I say, if something's heavy in my hand and I push it that way, it makes my body want to go this way. If I do a loop, it pulls me back this way. And then your movement and weapons start becoming integrated. So it's not so much you have a step and an attack. It's like your step is your attack, is your adjustment, is your movement. It's like They say mentally you want to be like, if I want my weapon here, my feet and my body should follow. And it's one of the principles. If you're ever thinking about footwork, you're probably doing something wrong. Which is what makes footwork so difficult to teach, because it is highly important, but it's almost like an emergent thing. Sorry, my phone. This is terrible. Any questions on that before we move on?
Yeah, I've always heard like walking is just controlled falling.
Yes, exactly. There's this whole concept of like the pendulum being the thing that you don't interrupt. So if you know, can't go through the whole class, but you get a lot of movements where, say I wanted to turn, people might do something like this, but we consider that interrupting the pendulum. Ideally, we want something where I'm moving and I need to change direction. My hands can keep doing exactly what they were doing previously, and it doesn't change that. And if you get that fundamental, your dynamic footwork and your footwork for skirmishing is continuous, and you're not interrupting this at any point. And that's like one of our big things, like do not interrupt motion any more than you have to, because even with prediction, if I move in a smooth pace, I can quite accurately say when I'm going to reach a certain point. I can be like, I know I'm going to hit the table now, kind of thing. Same with, moving through formations or football or trying to get around people. The minute I start slowing down, a lot of different elements start coming in. It's no longer just my motion and a certain point in time. It's my motion. I've stopped. Now they're going to start calculating. Then I have to go again, and it starts getting messy. So we're generally saying stay in motion constantly. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? No? Cool.
So everything that you're mentioning definitely seems very focused on trying to have more of a low friction, low outside additional force environment.
Yes.
Is there any time, have you ever found situations where there is a benefit to trying to add more friction, more surface area, so to say, I suppose, or maybe dealing with that, or?
So there's two kind of extremes. Basically, in art, everything has an extreme opposite. So there's styles that are extremely nimble and moving, and there's styles that are extremely grounded. So it's not one or the other. You can do both. When we do have to create more area or more resistance or hold ground, essentially, which is I think what you're getting at, like areas where you're not moving, we'll do the exact same thing, but we're doing it inside our framework. So we'll never sort of stand here and do this and just stay there. It's usually as you're approaching, it will be slight adjustments. Or if I make contact with you, I won't try and resist. I'll try and absorb and slightly deflect, kind of thing. But it all comes from the idea that even when it looks like I'm standing still, I'm always on a slight tipping point that I adjust with my weapons, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's not stand here, move shield here, move arm here, and do this. It's more, as I move my shield, that moves my body. As I move my sword, that moves my body, and I can't help it because they're so connected. But it can look quite static. If someone's very good at it, it could look very casual, and then as you go to touch them, it's like they're moving off and then they hit you. This kind of thing. Cool? Okay. If I can get this thing to work. So, practical takeaways from this. One of the examples I like to give to my students is riding a bike. It's physically complicated, but because you've got something that is ensuring that you're staying in sync with physics, if you like, you're rolling downhill, the bike wants to keep moving, whatever it is, you've got a continuous feed of information that you can use. If you can focus on that and get keen to that with feelings, every sort of adjustment after that becomes much easier. For example, I'll say to them, do stuff like, forget about your footwork for a moment. Let's just get you into a position where it's uncontrollable, you're falling. Now, this is a really common thing in terms of, I guess, movement sports, rugby and stuff. It's difficult to translate to martial arts all the time. But in terms of body mechanics, if you can correct from a falling position comfortably and not feel uncomfortable about it, feel really, at ease, if you like, when you are in your ideal position, movements become much easier. Does that make sense? I'm still a little bit drunk, so.
It was a good night last night, yeah.
It was a good night.
Would this all tie into just practicing footwork for muscle memory purposes?
No.
No.
So,
okay.
So one of the sort of principal sins that you can do is try to practice things exactly. So like a kata, for example, in their system, that is considered like robotic. It's like teaching your body to move in a precise way that's not realistic. Whereas their thing is more like dance. It's like if you wanted to show your skill, you're trying to move around and show that I can like make insane corrections and I can make mistakes and adjust, and they're judging you based on how adaptable you look and how much things you can picture. So a person that's practicing and it only looks like they're ever fighting one person, they'd be like, oh, this guy's pretty basic. When you see someone very good practicing, you can see that they're very comfortable changing directions and looking around and turning back, and it's almost like watching rugby players do, you know, really complex cone drills. And the idea is you move the cones, you change the cones, and you get a lot of different variations, so the person has to vary. Whereas if you set in very hard limits on what is right and what is wrong, yeah, you become unstuck when you get uncomfortable.
Okay.
Cool?
Yeah.
It's a different like approach. They're not incompatible. You can do both. Like you can say get the basic structure right. It's just with us, they say once you start testing, make sure there's a lot of variation. Make sure you're getting jostled, essentially.
Oh, sure. Okay, yeah.
How do we reduce disrupting structure during motion? So again, look at your motions, whatever they may be, whether it's a step for a cut or a side step. Is there anything you can do to create motion without disrupting your structure? So rather than coming here and pushing, you might say, can I find the tipping point and sort of just push my hips back slightly and allow the momentum to carry me? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If it doesn't make sense, just fall and imagine someone grabs your hips. You'll feel that feeling like that sort of whiplash, and you're trying to get that in every motion. So if I want to step, I whiplash into it, kind of thing. Flow drills, really good for, kind of ties into your point, really good for like getting stuff pinned in, but are you training fluency or are you training repetition? Which is a massive thing. Like our teacher, if you keep doing the same thing, 3 moves in the same flow, it's like stop, start again. You've got to keep mixing it up, because you're no longer training fluency, you're basically training your scales, which is very different from playing with a band. Yeah? And it's fine to do both, just make sure you know which one you're doing. Because if you're just doing this very specific thing that you think it's going to be a perfect exchange every time, people can use that against you. In fact, one of the first things my teacher done, because I came from Wing Chun, I had this. He kept baiting me into trying to block stuff and then grabbing my arm and pulling me down. And he was like, this is like a clean example of you've trained a movement so exact that you can't switch it off anymore. Yeah? And how can we incorporate this into everyday movement? So for us, it's pretty easy. You learn to walk, you learn to like relax, counter relax, find that sort of floating point and adjust that. And this way I'm practicing my movement pretty much all the time, especially if I'm drunk. That way you can get thousands of reps out without really thinking about it. If your mechanics are different from what you're doing in your everyday, you've already created a lot of friction internally. Yeah? Any questions on any of that before I move on? Cool.
Do you have any good exercises or games or drills for kind of training your body to move in this way?
So one of the things I do, that I get my guys to do, just hold a weight and practice extremities. So this is a very brief kind of overview, but let's say it's a squat. I would say go too far forward and try to squat and see what that feels like. You'll feel tension in certain areas, release tension in those areas and see if you can get them to areas where it feels more comfortable. Classic one is lower back gets tight, release the lower back, feel the knees soften. But now your calves are getting tight, can you release the ankles and feel your calves soften? Now take it to a different extreme, do the same, do the same, do the same, do the same. And get used to adapting to different positions as opposed to finding the perfect position, which is, well, there is no perfect position, right? Any other questions? No.
Well, it does horrify me that I hear some schools are like, yeah, we'll practice motions for a year before you get to hold steel.
Yeah, no, our teachers very much, it's another interesting thing actually. So our teachers very much on, you have to have sharps at some point. Not because we're going to spar and kill each other with them, but as soon as you bring a sharp into something, it drastically changes your body mechanics. So sometimes I'll do like a knife drill, and I'll say something simple, like move out the way, and people kind of, I don't know, something like that, and I'm like, okay, let me get a real knife. I point it at them, and immediately they do that. And I'm like, so that's what your body would likely do under pressure. So it's again, that's a corrective exercise thing. You find out what actually happens under pressure and you use that to train them. So my teacher will get blades and you might see us doing stuff like, that looks essentially like dance, but it's very similar to almost horse dancing. where, does anyone know what horse dancing is? So when they train horses, you're trying to train the horse to respond to pressure. So they'll like put pressure towards the hind of the horse and it will walk like that. Then they push it towards the shoulder, then it will walk like this. And you're trying to get an instant response from the horse. If it takes you a lot of move kind of thing, the horse is a bit slow and it's not listening, because that's going to translate to when you're riding. You try and put a bit of pressure on the hind, or you try and tilt, and the horse goes fuck off, kind of thing. Well, no. So this would be like, I'm not on the horse. I'm standing and I'm moving the horse with my like hands. I'm saying like, go this way, move that way, this kind of thing. Where he'll be doing this with swords. So he'll be putting pressure on one side of you, and he expects you to be able to adjust quickly. And if it keeps changing, you should be able to keep adjusting. So it's far more about agility than combat. And you might say, oh, but is this really combat? Does this help your combat? Not necessarily, especially in a duel. But if you watch guys training, and you see these guys running through cones, hitting targets, changing direction really fast, pulling off complex maneuvers, those are generally the guys that you want on your team on the battlefield, right? So that's the kind of mentality they have. And yeah, and all of that should make things, again, a bit more cognitively less stressful, because you're no longer finding yourself in extremes and panicking. Every extreme feels quite normal to you, yeah? Cool. So strategic considerations. So battlefield, I've kind of spoken about already, but you have holding ground, which is its own thing. Like the tactics that work for holding ground obviously don't work for skirmishing. You have capturing ground, where the job might be nothing to do with fighting. It might be more, can we get there fast? And you've got strategies for pulling that off. And you also have managing risk. And this is one of the more difficult areas, because I've had conversations, for example, with like people that do self-defense or like sport, and they're like, oh, isn't this quite risky? Where it's like, you're a soldier at the end of the day. There's gonna be a lot of shit you're asked to do that is risky. And it's a statistical thing. Yes, people will fuck it up, but you have to have this idea that this guy's going to kill you. It's not gonna be like an exchange and we're gonna go, okay, fair play, mate. It's like you have to have this do or die. And the way they do it kind of sequentially and build you up towards higher risk or higher level skills is you match a risk to a strategy and a mindset. So for example, the first thing you learn is Varha. This is like holding a club, and you essentially just run at the guy, try and fake it out, and then try and run at him and push the club in his face. Super simple, but people get very good at it very quickly. But on top of that, they'll have the image of Varha, which is like an avatar of Shiva, holding up the world. You heard stories about this guy as a kid growing up, and you know that a wild boar is tenacious, and you try and imagine that, because they say if you have all of the form right, but you don't have the spirit of the tactic, it won't work. And if you can align these two things, so you understand that there's a certain type of aggression that works well with this, it tends to flow together quite nicely. Then they say, okay, if someone wants to beat you, they learn how to be cautious. They're going to learn how to use, axes and hooking weapons and pulling weapons. And their mentality is like, can they hold their ground and only move at the last minute? And again, that mentality of thinking, okay, I'm not just trying to go through the drill. There's a story, there's a culture, there's all this stuff that I can like use as inspiration to really get into character and be like, okay, he's gonna try and get me. I'm gonna be sneaky as fuck with my facial expressions and my body language and try and draw him into something. Because ultimately, for us at least, this is the stuff, as we said earlier, that makes the difference. Skill is great, but body language, spirit, all that shit makes the difference. Someone keeps calling me, and my phone's not turning off. And then you get to the third style, Garuda, which is the fickle style. It's the bird style, the skirmishing style, and it's the swordsmanship. And one of the massive things about that is being able to engage and then disengage smoothly. So one of the exercises they might get us to do is you have someone pointing at you, and you walk back and forth, and you've got to go up. No, stop, actually. No, there's a guy. No, wait, hold on a minute. That kind of thing. And you're trying to get the guy to slowly lose track. And you'll be surprised. Someone that's quite good at this can do very subtle body language. They can walk and they go like that, and the person goes, oh, fuck, I lost track of it. Because in a team game where people are running, that slight hesitancy can account for like, several yards of movement. I think we calculated it once that like at a jog, the average person covers like 2 yards every 10th of a second or something like that, which is quite a lot. So that is how you essentially take strategy and say, okay, rather than trying to go, okay, this is strategy A, I need to use strategy B, this is strategy C, I need to use strategy D. It's more, here is an emotion that I I've tied to a strategy, and if at any point you make me feel cautious, the caution will naturally switch me to a different strategy. If at any point I realize there's a lot of people and I actually feel fickle, I'll switch to a fickle strategy. So again, it's not so much the strategies themselves, it's more about having like a cognitive, efficient movement between these strategies, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Cool, yeah, so it's like, it's no longer memory, it's very like deep in your understanding of how your body moves. When I feel fickle, I move like a bird. When I feel aggressive, I move like the boar. When I feel cautious, I move like the snake, and so on and so forth. And the rule of thumb we're kind of given is speed is beaten by agility, strength is beaten by skill, skill is beaten by tactics, tactics are beaten by strategy, strategy is beaten by spirit, which is the, your aura, essentially. And then all of that is beaten by stealth. And stealth is, can I do this with minimal actions, with minimal tells, with minimal setup? And if you can do that, everything else doesn't really matter. Shoot him in the head with an arrow. And unfortunately, that is the end of my talk. In fact, very quickly. Practical takeaways, how do you put that into a lesson? When you're training, are you thinking about emotional content from the beginning? It's very, habitual for a lot of teachers to kind of go, look, we just want to get the movement right, we'll get the other stuff later. But the movement stuff, at least from our perspective, is not nearly as important as the emotional content, like facial expressions, body language. Like a good fighter, the minute you lift your sword, they've kind of gauged what level you're at because you seem a bit uncomfortable. Whereas someone that seems very comfortable in their posture and body language already kind of puts you on a back foot psychologically. Big thing in boxing as well. A lot of people lose before they start because the guy just looks aggressive. Then you've got, are we thinking about deception in our base practice? So I see a lot of drills that talk very specifically about body mechanics, and of course that is important, but I found that 80-20 is more deception. If you can fool the guy, your body mechanics can be absolutely shit. But if he fucks up his timing, he fucks up his timing. So how early are we putting this in? Because if we're leaving this stuff late, we're creating a scenario in which people are just stressed. And if you're stressed, you can't move properly. Whereas if you can really rely on stuff that doesn't require skill, doesn't require effort, doesn't require tension, things should be easier, essentially. Cool, so that's the end of the talk. Apologies, it was a bit short, I think. I don't know.
You're right on time.
Am I right on time?
I think so.
Oh, 15 minutes left. Oh, brilliant. Okay, not too bad at all. So, on the back of that, do you guys have any questions? So, obviously I've got corrective exercise background, I've got manual work for 15 years, I've got boxing, I've got martial arts. So I guess the last 15 minutes is up to you guys. Any questions you have about any of that, or anything, I'm happy to answer.
It does remind me of, say, the Arabic versus, the Eastern or Western music style, where, you don't, in the Arabic style, you don't even pick up an instrument until you understand, how to sing and the notes, before you even touch, anything else.
Yeah.
Understanding of how it all works.
Yes, I actually use that analogy quite a lot. It's like music, because I also play piano. I used to play in church, but I learned by ear, so it's a very different playing experience. It's not learn this song. For us, it's like the music is battlefield. It's like there's no point learning to duel if you don't know how to dodge a spear, basically, or you don't know how to work as a team and follow orders, kind of thing. And that perspective, kind of like what you've spoken about, it's far more about function than it is about perfection in a certain way, if you know what I mean. We still have the classical element of, here are some body mechanics that you have to get right, and there's some movement that you have to get right. But very early on, it has to be something that's alive. You can't learn music from music sheets, if you know what I mean. You have to hear it. Cool. Any other questions? No? Okay. So I was either really good or really bad.
I have a question. I was just trying to think of how to string the words together. You touched on the emotional regulation that comes with moving like this, which is interesting to me because in some of the trainings I've done, we've tried to detach emotions from the tactics completely. Like if you're getting too angry, that makes your movement sloppy, or you don't cover attacks because you're just charging in, so we try to have people not follow these intuitive emotions, which
we have the same principle, but it's a bit more nuanced. It's like there's nothing wrong with the emotion, provided you're using it in the right context. So if that tactic that you're using requires anger, removing anger from it is hurting the tactic. So we have like aggressive tactics, very like, I think the SAS say similar things. What is it? It's like surprise and I forget. But anyway, they have this idea of being super aggressive, super fast, getting things done. You can't do that cautiously, and you can't do that in a detached way because the emotions help, kind of thing. So it's not a total, just go with your emotions. It's more understand what emotion links to what technique and links to what strategy, and make sure they're aligned, because if they're mentally aligned, they're mentally easy, if that makes sense. Cool.
To tie into her question or her point, is there a point in which you should detach a little bit? Like if your anger is going to start to move into harm more than technique,
So,
how do you know you're going to be at that point?
This is kind of getting philosophical, but but in Shastar Vidiya, it's like attached to Advaita Vedanta. So they have this idea of non-dualism, which is I can be hyper angry and hyper aggressive and feel all these emotions, but I can switch them off. My teacher would say it's like an actor. An actor doesn't pretend to be angry. They have techniques for making themselves angry, and when they yell cut, they just switch them off. So it's not a all or nothing. It's like just use what is available, kind of thing.
Oh, that makes sense. I didn't think of it like that. Cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Good job.
So,
Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was interesting was kind of around that point was the embodying the spirit of the technique, and obviously there's a lot more religious content in the way that Shastar Vidiya is practiced. I gather that like HEMA is very detached from whatever religious content there was that was attached to it at the time.
Yeah.
But like one of the things that I've found really useful both as a student and as an instructor is, for lack of a better term, like role play, like fight like someone you aren't.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a club, you're all fighting the same people. You get to know how those people fight. If you can get someone who can fight like people from a different club, or fight, one of the things we see in HEMA, thankfully less now, is just like the buffalo, the big, strong guy who's just going to keep swinging. Nobody in our club fights like that naturally, but if you can kind of channel that, that can be a really useful training tool. Are there techniques, either that you guys have or that the sources have, or anything for kind of embodying or getting people to embody the spirit of the technique, or is it just there's the story behind it and that kind of is sufficient for that?
Traditionally, it's the teacher. Like the teacher in tradition would have learned all these things from those teachers who learned it from specific people. So they even say once you've learned the whole art, you should key to like the thing that you're, that suits your build. So for certain styles are really good for big guys, but it's not really good for small guys. But really it's the teacher, in that he will embody the stuff and your job is to be able to copy him. And again, it's a bit like dance. There's a big expectation of you watching and copying, and he's not going to explain how to act fickle. He's like, this is what caution looks like, copy me. This is what fickle looks like, copy me. But also he will say, if there's like someone that's really good at a certain aspect, copy them. And copy not their movement, but their character, as you say. So yeah, that's pretty much the same thing. It's just they have a very hard line on the Gurudev is the guy that has like been through the training and you can't kind of make it up, which I do, so I'm in trouble really, but that is like how it would be handled traditionally. Thank you for the question. Any others?
To go back to the anger issue,
Yep.
your intensity, like my background is like practical self-defense and like shooting, and like being able to use it in a closed place and like in a situation, and like it's really hard to like keep that in check sometimes.
I can imagine.
Like your adrenaline, you're shaking, you're maybe crying.
Well,
you have to keep on going.
And this is again like it kind of leads into the ideas that you can't really control emotions, but if you understand them well enough, they can be very effective. Like if you are cautious, switch to a cautious tactic. Like if you are feeling a bit, I want to dart, switch to a tactic that uses that. And it's pretty much very much in that vein. Cool.
I'm interested in the deception element you were talking about towards the end.
Okay.
In terms of like, are there
Principle?
ways you practice that, or principles to just ways you show like
Yeah.
others how to do that,
So there's the basic deception stuff, which is usually just getting very good at timing. And if you have, I'd say play basketball, dude. Play basketball, play rugby. It'll become very, obvious. There's a timing element where if you just do something simple at the right time, you can get the guy to go the wrong way. But beyond that, there's the whole stealth thing is all about doing stuff that does a couple things. It hides big things and small things. So if anyone came to my class, we showed that how you do a slow movement, very small slow movement that someone keys to, and very suddenly switch to something else. That's a basic kind of deception. Another one is to keep the opponent in two minds. So this is a deception that kind of slows them down in that, yes, I can make this unavailable and make this available, but I don't want to do it in a way that they know I'm doing that. It's all about doing it where it's like, I've slowly snuck the blade into place, I've not done anything too contrasty, and now I'm suddenly in this place and they have to make a decision. And it's the element of deception that's more about controlling the timing. I could probably explain that better. In fact, so let's say I walk up to my opponent and I want to do some sort of deception, but he sees me getting ready for the deception, he immediately is not going to take it. Whereas if I walk up to him very nonchalant, and in that final sort of moment or the final step, I lift my hand up, he has no option but to attend it, because he's like, holy shit, I've got a split second before this guy might attack. And then that's the perfect place to do a deception. And small thing, but massive results in that. If I lift my hand up a split second too early, he'll be like, I see what you're trying to do. You know what I mean? And then the final thing is generally do the opposite of what you want to do. So if I want to go backwards, I try and project that I'm going forwards. If I want to go in, I try and project that I'm going out. This kind of stuff. And there's a mechanic way in which we do this, and that a backward step would be tilting your head forward and almost imagine like there's a wall here, so I go like this. But that from front on can also be backwards or look like forwards. So immediately it's doing that, but in every movement. So a strike to the legs will look like a strike to the head. And you learn how to go from a slow to a fast, a slow to a fast, a slow to a fast, and hiding really big movements and really small things. And it's very, if you've ever read, Darren Brown's got a book on illusion, it's almost exactly the same kind of principles. It's like, spread their attentional load by making everything nonchalant, make something very easy to attend, but do it in a way in which they're not sure. Yeah, it's not immediately obvious. Cool. Very nice question. Anything else? Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you.